Welcome back to the She Thrives Influential Women podcast. I am your host, Lori Murphy, and I am an empowerment coach for women, public speaker, as well as an award-winning published author. And newly to my resume, I am adding a monthly columnist for the Rochester Women's Online Magazine. And it is so great to have all of you women joining us today. This podcast is, started off as a way to share a message, and now it's becoming more of a community with amazing women that come on and share their stories, their journeys. And the point of all of it is to bring positive influence into women's lives, to be able to show them that there is a way through their own personal journeys and how to get there and to be able to thrive in their lives. And it is a mission of mine, a calling of mine, and my passion. And I am beyond blessed to be able to have these opportunities, to be able to be a role model and influence in your life. And today I have an incredible woman who I am so excited to bring on. Tosca, she is just a delight. I've talked to her a couple times now, even before the podcast. Great personality. I love this woman. I'm so excited to bring her on. So, Tosca Fasso, she is a former Fortune 100 executive on a mission to rework the workplace by putting people first. After snagging her first management role at age 25, she knew that creating a vision with a team, coaching them to succeed, and building a culture where team members actually liked and respected each other was her life's work, which is very well needed. Tosca worked her way up the corporate ladder from administrative assistant to Wall Street executive. But the higher she climbed, the less power she seemed to have. The money and prestige were there, but the ability to really do what was right for her team members was not. So Tosca left her Wall Street position to write her book, Not Safe for Work, A Good Manager's Guide to Better Feeling Work in a Toxic Culture. She also hosts the Manager on a Mission podcast and coaches people focused leaders who know there's a better way to manage teams, but need to just a little support to build the systems that were both good for people as well as profits. Tosca also is a volunteer career mentor, competitive karaoke champion. Yes, intermediate adult figure skater. She lives in Los Angeles area with her techie husband, two rescue chihuahuas, and three parrots. Hi, Tosca. It's so good to have you.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So, before we really dive into everything, I have to ask, knowing that you're from the Los Angeles area, how are you all doing out there after the devastation of the
Yeah,
fires?
January was a very difficult month, and I am one of the lucky people who wasn't as affected as others. We almost bought in Altadena, actually. It's a lovely community with beautiful historic homes and culture, and there's the devastation is exactly the right word. It's devastating. We had to evacuate for about 5 days because of smoke. We were not in the path of the flames, but the smoke was pretty widespread here. So, I mean, my heart goes out to my
Yes.
friends, neighbors. Pasadena, which is right below Altadena, they've got some air quality and water concerns too. It is devastating. That is the word. Thank you for asking.
Yes.
We are
Oh,
okay.
sure.
We are grateful to be okay.
I'm happy to hear that you're okay. And my prayers, in everything I possibly can give, to the people
Yeah.
that were not as fortunate and are still going through the struggles of this devastation.
Mhm.
Um, and I know that before when I was reading your bio and I saw that, I was just like, oh, I was like, I just want to make sure that that you're all okay
Thank you.
and you guys can rebuild from here.
Yeah, appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself. So you're from the Los Angeles area. Did you
I'm
originate
from
from
Northern
there?
California. Yeah, so
Okay.
I'm from California, lived in the Bay Area outside of San Francisco and in San Francisco too. But when I was in my mid 30s, I had really never lived anywhere else. And, there's a lot of talk about California versus other parts of the country. And I wanted to know for myself what it
Hmm.
was like to live somewhere else and why people either moved to California and loved it or just didn't like it and couldn't stop talking about why. So when my husband got a chance to get a grad program at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, I went with him. And Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I had never lived in the snow before, and I loved it. I saw some of the reasons why people might leave California because I saw artists, sculptors who had property. They owned houses. That's
Yeah,
hard to do in California to be an artist and own property. I think it's becoming harder and harder across
right.
the country. So this was maybe about 15 years ago. Probably more actually now that I think about it. But anyway, seeing how there were different cultural things, different food items, different ways of talking, even like Pittsburgh is known for Pittsburghese. It's got a little bit of a dialect that is well known, yins, for example, the
Hmm.
contraction of Ewans. I love language and thinking about all of those differences was fascinating to me. I also lived in Austin, Texas. I've lived in Brooklyn, New York. But yeah, I mean, California is my home.
Yeah.
Back to the wildfires, it makes it a little bit concerning, though, I have to say. But yeah,
Sure.
I've lived different areas of the country. I'm interested in more. I do enjoy exploring. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So I'm here in LA right now. We'll see if that's what is going to be the case, in a year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Who knows where you'll end up, right?
yeah, really. I'm one of those people. I really we don't have children, so
Right.
I know that that is one of the reasons that we are able to do that. Slowed down a little bit. We used to move all the time for work or adventure, and now we've been in this house for 4.5 years. That's the longest I've ever lived in one place since I was a child, probably.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, I think it's great. Now, I've never moved out of my state, but I've moved around quite a bit just in my general area. I usually
Yeah.
about 4 years and I move.
Yeah.
And it's
And you move.
just because life just more or less for life changes, but some,
Hmm.
and but I think it's amazing that you've pretty much gone from all different parts of the country. So you got to experience all different cultures.
Different cultures. Yeah,
East
I think
Coast and then,
think it's
down in
important.
Texas.
East Coast, the South, the Mid-Atlantic is what they call the Pittsburgh area. It's not
Hmm.
really the Midwest. I guess I haven't lived in the Midwest, or the Pacific Northwest. I haven't done that either. So I've got
Yeah.
some places to check off.
And you said, so I'd love to hear about, your transition. So you started off, working as an administrative assistant, worked your way up into Wall Street.
Yeah.
You've had a very fascinating career. So tell us about, where it all started and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm solid Gen X, which everybody knows is like the latchkey kids who took care of themselves, cooked their own dinner, started working at age 13. That's me. I'm definitely in that camp. I had my first, besides being a babysitter, my first job was I was a paper girl. I delivered papers. And it's funny because for me, like work is one of those things I think is very polarizing how people feel about it. Like it's your life or it's not. And for me, it was my life. Work
Mhm.
was my life. I loved it. I had a bit of a chaotic childhood. And so having the structure and the reward system that's built in, that can be built in at work, was addictive to me. It was like, oh, I just do this, I get this. I want clothes, I can have them. I want to be appreciated, that happens. And so for me, work was like a refuge, which is, you know, a bit of a commentary probably on the life that I had. But I loved that. I loved feeling valued. I loved feeling like if you do X, you get Y. And so I was working, like I said, from being a young teenager, and I eventually got a job at a college my grandma used to work at. And I was in the dean of faculty and dean of students offices, and I was creating things like the handbook. I was early, like on one of those little itty bitty Macs. Remember? I don't know if you remember those SE2s or whatever they were. We're
I
talking
don't.
mid 80s. Okay, so yeah, you're not as old as I am, but
Mid 80s, I was probably 3 years old.
okay, all right. So yeah, I'm about 15 years older than you, probably, it sounds like. So, I was on these really early Macs building these like programs and I loved it. I just absolutely loved it. And I had my own money, I could buy my own stuff. I had time out of the house. And for me, work just made a lot of sense.
Mhm.
And I realized that I was good at it and I liked it. And I don't know what it was about having a team, but once I finally got a couple of people who were, reporting to me, I must have been about 25 when that happened.
Mhm.
I was an admin and I had an administrative team. We ran the front office at a recruitment firm, and I just loved it. I just did. Like I realized, oh, if you create these conditions, people love their work. I can do that for people. I can create an experience where people feel much better about those 8 to 10 hours that they spend here with me, and that you can create clarity and you can create calm and you can create purpose and direction. And I thought, wow, this is a pretty amazing thing that I get to do.
Mhm.
So for me, I was one of those people who didn't understand what was, why people didn't want to have a corporate job. And now I understand. It's a bit of a heartbreak when I always figured that, oh, it's because I'm young. Oh, it's because I work at a small company. Oh, it's because I'm low on the totem pole that I can't do all the things I need. And once I become this high and I make this much money and I have this title, I'll be able to do everything I need to do for my team. Well, I couldn't be further from the truth. And there's a couple of things that I think are at play there. And one of them is that work has changed over the last, again, back to my age. We're talking like early 90s when I was 25. And so that has changed a lot of how work is done and how companies have merged and what they expect from people and the unfair exchange of volume of work and pay. That has changed a lot. And then also, I think what changed is that working for a highly regulated company makes it difficult. And then I think there's also sometimes the higher you get, the more you have to be the mouthpiece of policies
Mhm.
you don't agree with. Because
Mhm.
if you're just a, manager down at the bottom like I was in my 20s, and there's
Mhm.
like layers of 8 people above you, it's easy to go, "Ugh, I can't do anything about that." But then when
Right.
you're like 3 from the top, maybe, or 4 from the top on Wall Street and you can't do anything, that's not a good look, you know? And I realized, oh, people are expecting that I have the power to do these things. And I did what I could, but ultimately there were some things that I really didn't think were right for people, and that didn't matter. And
Mm.
that was heartbreaking and enraging to me. It pissed me off.
Yeah.
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 And it broke my
Absolutely.
heart. Yeah. And I think
Absolutely.
there's this maybe I know that I have this will probably say a lot. I have a lot of followers on LinkedIn because I've been on LinkedIn since it started pretty much, and also because now I'm very public out there with what I say. And I have had people write me, text me, chat me, and say, I love your posts. I can't like them or comment on them, but I want you to know I appreciate them. What a
Hmm.
commentary. I can't, because the optics of liking what I'm talking about treating people well, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And I know it's a problem because I worked in a place where I wasn't allowed to do that either.
Right.
And you're not allowed to have a position that is contrary. You're not allowed to
Hmm.
say, well, I don't really think this is a great approach for people and this is hurting people. And the
Right.
fact that people are afraid to click a like on that, I think that says a lot.
Yeah. I have, at times have had to, out of that fear,
Yeah.
um, like have completely like have blocked coworkers in the past so in case they ever saw anything, like so they couldn't see anything. that they can't see my profiles, they can't,
Yeah.
just for the simple fact of I don't want anything to jeopardize losing my job,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
speaking up and saying this isn't right, this isn't
Mhm.
how it should be. This isn't leadership. This is
Yes.
when you have your when half your staff wants to walk out the door because
That's
they're
not
not
leadership.
happy, that's not leadership. And
That's
that's not
that's fear.
create, yeah,
Yeah,
that's creating an unhealthy workspace where people cannot thrive.
correct. Yes, exactly.
And the world needs people like you to be able to voice that and be able to, you want to be able to provide that place for people where they feel
Yeah.
encouraged and safe. You are a leader.
Thank you. I
And I
try.
and I think management roles and people that are not they're fearful of people like you because you're speaking the truth and you're giving away the secrets that they don't want given away.
And what a commentary that is, right? Like, why is leading with fear and control the default? What are we
Control.
getting? What are we getting out of this? We're getting fearful people who can be controlled, who can work for less money and do more hours instead of creating conditions where they can, like you said, thrive. I know that's the podcast title, Thrives, and where they feel safe
Mhm.
emotionally and where they feel they can take risks in ways that are supported and can help us learn. People are going to make mistakes. Creating a space where there's not fear of repercussion and instead opportunity for everybody to learn from it and to outdo ourselves the next time, that's so much healthier. And
Right.
also, it is how you create the best products. You don't create the best products and experiences through fear and control. You just
Right.
don't. So much of my work was at agencies, digital agencies back in the day when there was a separation. There was like print agencies and there were people who did website stuff, and I was on that side, the people who did website stuff, and we created online experiences when that was new, or ads or early apps and that kind of thing. And you create the best experiences for people when you're open-minded and it's okay to make a misstep. You
Right.
don't create the best things by having everybody think the same stuff. You're not going to
Hmm.
solve the world's problems by everybody thinking the same stuff.
Right. Now, would you so in your experience and in your, expertise and journey with all of this, why do you think that was the way management has like developed, or how that approach of fear and
Yeah.
control, like where did that even come from, and where did some like where
I
did it ever
mean,
become like, oh, that works, okay, let's do it, and now it's what people lead by.
it's a holdover from the Industrial Revolution, which is quite a ways back. So, factory floor management, if you put your finger in the thing, you're going to lose your finger, right? If you're not keeping up, someone's going to get burnt. If you're not doing this, the whole, car isn't going to be built correctly.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's where the whole watching someone work was someone's job as a manager, watching the assembly line. But we didn't really evolve past that mindset of, as a manager, I watch you and then I correct you.
Hmm.
We're not building, most of us are not building things in this country anymore. Most of us are managing information, knowledge workers, as they call it, or technology. We're not, if you make a mistake, you can do Control Z. I mean, that's like, so what?
Yeah.
And also, so much of work is very complex and political because companies have been since the 90s merging and acquiring other companies. And so what ends up happening is you've got like two cultures coming together, and
Hmm.
you need to kind of manage how this team works and bring them into this new way of working. Or, maybe there's something from this you want to take that is good and bring it in. And then there's leaders who think one thing and leaders who think another, and they're both still there and they're kind of like jockeying politically. And so what employees need is not someone to say that was the wrong thing, but to give them the full context of what we're working with and be people who can manage those complex relationships.
Hmm.
And giving them a whole layer of fear on top of that makes for pretty challenging work. I'll say one of the things I started noticing maybe in the last 10 years more because of the acceleration of mergers and acquisitions is that so much of my work was not pushing anything live anymore.
Hmm.
Stuff, a lot of stuff does not ever launch. It
Okay.
was using these projects to try to understand what could be the thing eventually that would launch, which
Right.
is, like maybe there's five projects that are kind of all, they're almost like a horse race. They're all
Hmm.
happening at the same time. And part of my job, I saw as a leader, was to be able to go, that's the horse. I want this team to bet on this horse. I can tell. And to be able to take that knowledge of what I know of the people who are asking for it, the past projects that didn't get launched or didn't get funded ultimately, and say, this is where you need to spend most of your time,
Hmm.
right here. And these things, let's keep them alive. Let's, talk to people. Let's try to maybe combine these two. What I think a lot of other leaders do is they take everything at face value
Right.
and they say, do it all. And that doesn't help because there's so many projects that are just not what I call real. And
Yep.
so my job is to interpret and to guide and to help people and show them opportunities as opposed to watching and delivering new projects every week. Do this, do this, do that. And then
Yep.
you didn't do that right. So there's a lot of political and emotional nuance that is required. And yet, we're still got factory floor managers out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what's happening, this clash. Your original question was, where did that come from? So yes, it came from that. And
Hmm.
then also there's another layer here, which is I talk about it a lot in my book, more than I ever wanted to as someone who's not an economist. I studied poetry in school. So but I had to learn about this to be able to talk about it and have an informed opinion about it. And what is the dominant way that businesses work today is they are evaluated by their stock price.
Hmm.
We've all heard this shareholder value, shareholder value.
Yeah.
So there are lots of different stakeholders in business.
Hmm.
One of them is shareholders.
Okay.
But the others are the community around a company where they live,
Hmm.
perhaps, like let's say there's environmental concerns. There are also the employees of a company, right? So maybe there's government as a stakeholder in some way. Who knows?
Hmm.
Depends on the company. But of all of those stakeholders, the people who buy and own shares, that's who we worship. And the other ones don't matter. And so if
Right.
you only value shareholder as a stakeholder, if you only value them and the stock price, well, guess what happens? Doesn't matter what you do to employees, doesn't matter what you do to the environment around. As long as that stock price is going up, doesn't even matter actually if your product is very good.
Hmm.
So as again, back to the merger problem, think about, even though you're younger, even think about 10 years ago, how many more banks there were. What
Right.
happened to Washington Mutual? What happened to, I mean, there's so many. I actually had a list over here, but I can't find it. But anyway, there's lots of banks that are no more. Okay, so like Merrill got bought by Bank of America.
Hmm.
E-Trade got bought by Morgan Stanley. Chase got bought by JP Morgan. It just took me a second to get it back in my head.
Yeah.
Um, so does their website and app matter to you as much because you're like, F it, I can't, I'm not going to change because there's only two others, and are they really going to be any better? They don't have to compete for your money anymore.
Yeah.
So that's another stakeholder that doesn't matter as much. The customer. As long as the stock price keeps going up, that's how we say a company is good. That's
Hmm.
it. So that is so lopsided. It's so skewed that we have people doing the work for these shareholders, and they just don't matter as long as you're delivering shareholder value.
Yeah.
That is one of the biggest problems. Why it's okay to treat, okay with quotes, to treat employees the way that we do, give them teeny tiny little raises, even though we had a record year. Stock price has never been higher. Oh, but you're not getting a higher bonus because the reason that you are not getting a higher bonus is it helps us get the stock price up. So those two things almost work together. Treat our employees where stock price goes up.
Right.
Yeah. So those are the reasons. Holdover from factory floor plus this worship of the stock price.
Wow. I
So
mean,
that
it's
sounds like
really
a lot of
fascinating to
studying.
have it explained to that level, because I think we just are so programmed and so used to,
So used to hearing it now. It's shareholder
yes.
value, shareholder. Mm,
It took me like 41 years of my life. Or I'd say, well, I haven't been working all of those years,
sure.
obviously, but to really realize what like what bad management really is and
Yeah.
what's right and what's wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, when I sit back sometimes and it's like, man, I bite my tongue a lot with a lot of things to avoid ruffling those feathers. But because I've
Yeah,
heard of
because of
people,
the control, the power and control.
yep, exactly. So when you decided, so you're working, up in Wall Street, you have a
Yeah.
team of people and you want to be able to do more and be able to lead the way that you believe is right and you can't. You're
Mhm.
pretty much limited to what you can do. You made the decision to leave.
Ultimately, I stayed there almost 7 years, so I did do a lot
Hmm.
while I could, but the toll it took. And I will say that those last 7 years, I saw it become worse as
Hmm.
it became bigger and our team was assimilated more. What somebody at my firm described this very well. She had been there, she's still there. She'd been there like 30 years. She said she saw like new departments would come in and they would have
Hmm.
this level of freedom and flexibility, because the firm is trying to absorb some, new competency or new
Hmm.
thinking. So they would kind of tolerate you for a while to be on the fringes. And then
Okay.
once they kind of can that team can kind of prove that they belong there and that there's a way that it fits into the machine, then
Hmm.
you get subsumed by the machine. And then the hammer comes down and the microscope is on. And so that's what happened. Also, we had a little bit of freedom. There were some regulations that came into that changed things. You know, kind of in a rock and a hard place when there's federal regulations. Like, what are you supposed to do? It makes
Right.
it pretty hard. Yeah, so I did stay until it became a mental and physical health problem for me.
What was happening with your mental and physical health at this point?
Well, there's a lot of waking up in the middle of the night and panicking. And then also like you said, biting your tongue, like knowing that you have to say this thing to this other person, even though you really just don't agree with it. And then having to go back to your team and saying, I'm sorry, I tried. Here's what we can do. Here's how I will help you, but we cannot do this thing that I know is right. But let's try this. And also, I hear you. I think a lot of what managers can do when they can't actually change policy is just be a person and admit that this isn't great and have time for people to come to you and tell you about it and hear them as opposed to, well, we just have to do this, so get over it. No, nobody wants that. So what
Hmm.
was happening is nobody was doing that for me. So I was getting a lot of what, yeah, just, deal with it. If you don't like it, you can leave kind of attitude, which ultimately I was kind of like, yeah, I guess I guess I can. I
Yeah.
guess I will.
It's
Okay.
like, well,
Yeah.
I hear you and bye.
Yeah. Yeah. And it just became, I felt like I was living two lives.
Hmm.
That's not a healthy way to be where you feel like you don't have integration of your two selves. So I felt like I was this over here when I was talking to these people, and then I was my real self over here. And I felt like
Yes.
I just couldn't do that for any longer. That was
Yeah.
long enough. And again, to the point of how much I loved having work where I felt purposeful. You know, it paid a lot of money. We did great work. The team around me did great work and really changed a lot of things. And so it wasn't all bad. And that made it hard too, because
Yes.
you feel beholden. Like I was able to buy a couple of houses, and I'm not kidding, like two houses. I never was that kind of person to be able to do that. And so, yeah, I got something out of it. That's true. You
Hmm.
have to be honest about that. And there's a lot of opportunity for people who can, like you said, bite their tongue. There's a lot. And then there's a lot of people who are casualties of that too, if you can never get up high enough where you get that, and all you're doing is just there's more work and the same pay, and that's not fair either. So it's a pretty complex and emotional kind of topic.
Right.
It's people's livelihoods you're talking about.
Exactly. So now the work that you do is you, to clarify, so what you do is your work is centered around trying to change that trajectory to
Correct.
get step
Yeah.
out of that fear and control and
Yeah.
be able to this is leadership and let's create a space for everyone to motivate them and inspire them to want to keep moving forward and to
Yes.
grow.
Correct. Yes. So I left to write this. I did. I felt like you just said I wanted to change this. I mean, maybe I can't, maybe it won't work,
Hmm.
but I had to try.
Hmm.
And my book is two parts. It's a manifesto in the front and it's a manual in the back. So there are a lot of books on how to lead well. They're all
Hmm.
over the place. And some of them are fantastic, but most of them don't really talk about the stuff you and I just talked about. You get
Right.
that somewhere else. You get that from a different book.
Hmm.
I wanted to provide some clarity for people who were wondering, why is it like this? What is happening? So that they
Hmm.
had the vocabulary for it and they had the history for it, and so that they could understand it and feel like they can speak about it intelligently too,
Right.
then provide the solutions, as opposed to just here's some cool stuff you can do without acknowledging. I feel like people need that acknowledgement. They need to be heard. They need that
Hmm.
validation. It was a lot of it was for validation and empowerment for employees.
Right. And so the book now, if anybody listening wants to find the book, where can they find your book?
Yes, so you can get it on Barnes and Noble or Amazon,
Okay.
and you can get the EPUB, which would be like the digital version, or paperback.
Hmm.
And you can also hear parts of it for free on my podcast, Manager on a Mission. I think I've read a couple of chapters on there. And then, a lot of what I talk about in the podcast episodes, I write about in the book, but it's not all read out loud like an audiobook.
Sure. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And your podcast is that on all of the platforms,
Yeah.
like iTunes, Spotify,
All
and
all of them, all of them. Yes, yes, yes. And I do, solo episodes where I just talk. I also have interviews like we're doing now. And one of the interviews that I think people, if they're listening to this and they are interested in some of the stuff we were talking about, the economic part of it, I interviewed these two guys who wrote a book called Better Capitalism, and
hmm.
they talk a lot about this whole shareholder stakeholder discussion. And in fact, they wrote the foreword for my book.
Okay.
So you can read a little bit about them there, and I also quote them in the book. But if you wanted to hear more about this, that episode is interesting, and their book, Better Capitalism, is fantastic. It's very aligned with what we're talking about here.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So now at this stage, now how long have you been doing this?
Okay, so I left my job not this past November, but the one before. So less than a year and a half.
Hmm.
And it was a,
That's
a
awesome though.
a whole reinvention thing. It was very difficult, I'll say that, because of all the stuff we talked about. I
Right.
liked I liked work. I liked being a professional. I liked teams. I'm one of those people. I'm one of those
Hmm.
like I'll go sing karaoke with you guys until 2 in the morning. I'm that person. So to just be here by myself, staring at a screen and kind of like dismantling the things that helped me like buy property and leave an abusive husband, that was weird for me. I did not like it. And I felt lonely and I felt like I made a big mistake a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the time. And I felt like, oh my gosh, people are gonna hate me. What if nobody likes this? All that stuff you go through when you decide, okay, I guess I'll put my real self out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a it was not my favorite time, I'll say that.
No, and to move through all of that, to make that transition, to make those choices and let your true self, shine and be transparent and out there. What did you do during those times to get through those challenges and those hurdles?
Well, I had a therapist. That was
They
important.
help.
They do. They definitely do. My husband's fantastic. This husband, not the one that I left. This one's great. He was helpful. I also eventually, it took me a long time. I found these female entrepreneur communities online, and that was an absolute lifesaver. And I
Hmm.
did hire a brand partner, someone who she calls herself feral because she really is. She's never worked a job. She's always only had her own ventures, whether that was like starting a business that's a, community kind of exposure business, and then also like photography and this other brand stuff that she does. So I hired this woman who's a genius to do my photography, my website, all of my brand assets, even some of the language. Like I've never seen someone so multi-talented visually, verbally, and then understand how to brand.
Hmm.
So she kind of like put a mirror to me in a way that I couldn't do. And I was like, oh, is that how people see me? Oh, okay. And really learning to embrace who that person is, which is a pretty goofy person in a lot of ways, which I didn't like. I didn't want to know that about myself. I didn't want to be a nonconformist, but I am. That
Hmm.
was hard to admit. I
Yeah.
was, oh, okay, I like fitting in this little box and having some properties. So if
Yeah.
I don't have one of them anymore because you know what I mean? Like you need these kinds of jobs to do that. And so I had to sell that and probably have to sell this. Like that's the reality of when you decide to not live within that system is
Right.
you take those kinds of risks,
Hmm.
and those trade-offs.
Right.
Yeah.
And would you say that you find that it was all worth it in the end?
I think it has to be, not because
Yes.
I have to be okay with it, but what would I have done instead? I would just be sitting here every day going, how can I do this? How am I going to do this? Can I do this another year? I do this another year. And then how long? How long am I going to have to do this? And also, I've said this on a couple of other podcasts, but there were some times where I was like, I need to take a Valium to go to sleep. That's not okay. Um, and you find yourself the next day like, should I take another one? What if it's just once a week? Is once a week okay?
Yeah.
What if, oh, I think I have some from a surgery. Let me go back looking, rifling through my drawer. Like, I was like, okay, this is starting to not be okay.
Right.
And also, I had been, like I said, I was a poetry major in school. I was a writing major. And I had been like threatening to write a book for, well, decades. Let's say 4 of them. And I was kind of like, am I a writer if I don't write? No, you just start dreaming about it. And
Yes.
I thought, am I going to be able to live with myself if I don't do this? And
Hmm.
unfortunately for my finances, the answer was no. I'm not going to be able to live with myself. And I think I also need to say that I was in a position of privilege to be able to quit my job and sell a property so that I could afford to do this.
Yeah.
Not everybody can do this. And so, in a way, that made it more of a mandate for me because
Hmm.
I'll bet there's other people who think these things and they can't quit their jobs. So
Right.
I have to do this.
Hmm. Right.
Yeah.
You took a major risk to get your message out there And I can only imagine the lives that you have helped transform by sharing your message and sharing what's on your heart and teaching.
I hope that's true. And
Oh,
I
I'm
know
almost positive it's very true.
I got a message from someone on LinkedIn who was a peer of mine, and that person wrote me a long message basically saying, I almost lost my mind as well, and thank you for writing this, and I can't do this anymore either. And I needed to know about this. And somebody else wrote me like last week. Every month or so, or a couple of weeks, I get a text from someone or a message on LinkedIn saying, "Thank you. You don't know how much this means to me." So I hope that, as they say, that, for everybody who says that there's other people who think it but don't say it, I hope that
Mhm.
that's true. I hope people are listening. I want that to be something that makes a difference. I hope
Absolutely.
it does.
So, would you say so do you have coaching programs to
I
do
do.
like one-on-one coaching?
Yeah, I
So, if
do.
people want to reach out to you and, for your guidance,
Yeah.
to learn from you, how can they find you?
Yes, so I have a website which is my name, which is designed by that woman I was just telling you about. It's just fantastic. And I have an interview with her on my podcast too. Her name is Steph Sheldon, so you can look for that episode if you want to hear about like reinvention and branding. This is a pretty interesting episode. But my website is just my name. It's toscafaso.com. And I have a little download that you can get that's a good manager's checklist. And it's
Hmm.
all the things like something you can do this week, this month, this quarter, this year without budgets and approvals. So something you can do that, again, if you don't have the power to change everything, that you actually can make a difference for people on your team
Sure.
without all that other stuff being true. So you can
Yes.
download that. You can get you can go to the book page that talks about my book. You can go to the podcast page and check out the episodes there. I have a little
Yeah.
blog that I sometimes do. We don't do enough blogging. But yes, there's some stuff there too. And then I'm on Instagram too. Also, my name it's Tosca Faso, and I post there some rants about return to office and other. I try to have a balance of constructive and ranting, but
Yes.
people love the rants.
I would say that, I don't do much ranting on the social media platforms, but I do notice that people like when you do like rant or so people really like to chime into stuff like that, you know?
They do. They do. And you can, if anyone is interested in the constructive part of what I offer, they can email me, they can chat me on DM me on Instagram. I'm there. And also I do like a little 30-minute free kind of get to know you and
Hmm.
understand your situation. So if anyone just wants to talk, I'm there too.
That's awesome. Now, for the person who works for, an industry, whatever industry it is, and they are like the bottom of the totem pole, the
Yeah.
bottom of the barrel, and they're in a situation where they feel like they will never be looked at as more. What would you say to them?
Sometimes the best way to get promoted is to go to another job. That's one of the reasons I moved all over this country is because I saw that I was ready to be whatever it was, senior, lead, director. And my bosses, for whatever reason, whether they didn't agree or they couldn't do anything about it, and it was kind of half and half, you know, they couldn't get me that. I left and I went somewhere else and I got my raises, I got my promotion. So sometimes it's that. Sometimes if you're in a big enough company, you can transfer
Hmm.
within the organization to different teams, but I am more of the mind that it's not you, it's them.
Yeah.
Usually it's circumstances where someone just doesn't see you that way. They hired you like this and they just can't see you this way. And sometimes the best way is to just find a different person who does appreciate that. There are ways to reposition yourself within a team, and a lot of that is the projects that you're on, and a lot of that requires a little extra work, I used to recommend that more. Now that companies are the way they are, everybody's got enough work going on. It often is just a matter of trying somewhere else.
Yeah.
But there are ways to position and say the right things, but it's a lot of
Yep.
burden for employees.
And I
But I
think
do talk about that too on my podcast.
like I know there's like a lot of like I can remember so the field of the industry that I've been in for 23 years, dentistry, is that's your only option. If you
Mm,
want to move up, you got
you
to move
move.
on
Yeah.
because I've been a dental assistant, so you can only go so far with that.
Yeah.
And I remember having a conversation with my father one day. He's like, "When are you going to find a place and stay there for like 30 years? Because that's what you used to do." And
That's
I'm
what you
like,
used to do.
"That's what I go, because then I will never, I will never
Never.
move, I will never move up, I'll never move
Never.
forward." And that's how it goes. Like you only
Yeah.
get so far. And then in a lot of places, in my experience, don't provide a lot of raises. And I've worked for places where I'd work 5 years and not have a single
Yeah.
raise. And if I did, it was 25 cents.
Oh gosh. Yeah,
And they just had a $2 million year. So it's like, and I'm,
that's what we were talking about.
you know, and
Exactly.
that is that's that weighs on me a lot because and
Hmm.
part of the reason, see, I'm working toward all of what I do because I have this mission that I've been called to do. So it's
Yeah.
and I have to be able to move on from dentistry in order to really fulfill it to its
Sure.
full extent. But I think the further along I go in my journey with all of this, I realize it more and more how not okay it is and how I spent 23 years not advocating for myself and
Mm-hmm.
accepting a lot
Hmm.
less than I
And you
deserved
deserve.
for
Yeah.
for being the asset that I am and what I bring to the table.
Right.
And a lot
Right.
and that is something that I know I'm not alone in because I think that that is just everywhere.
That's so many people's stories, and I'll say this on top of it. Companies have different budgets for retention and for hiring. And the hiring, they have more money. And so what often happens is the loyal people get stiffed. They call it the loyalty tax. And I saw it happen in front of my eyes. I have amazing team members who've been with me for 5 years. New person comes in, they make, and I'm not kidding you, 80,000 more than my person over here. And so I have to go fight for that.
Yeah,
That's
I've heard of that. That's not
it
fair.
happens, it happens all the time. So again, if you can leave or you can threaten to leave, that often is ridiculous, the counteroffer. Usually by the time you're trying to get a counteroffer, it's time to move on anyway. But
Yeah.
I do have a podcast episode about demystifying promotions in corporate America because I was on the promotion committee for 5 years in a row. So I know if people want to know what it is that gets you promoted, I do have that information. Like I said, it's a lot more work for you, and sometimes it's better just to, like you said, move on to move up. I mean that's a great way to say it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a shame it has to be that way, but
I
I
know.
don't think things are as they used to be, 40,
No,
50
there
years ago.
it's very different. And there are other people talking about this. It's not just me. I think there's, like I said, a lot of it is the outrage content does better. It's all over social media. I'm sure people know who I'm talking about. There's so many great accounts that are really funny. I think it's important that we talk about this.
Yep. You ever
Yeah.
see those like little like reels that go on, or they'll have like an animal like in an office setting, like it would be like
Uh-huh.
those like little cat videos where the cat's like
Yeah.
it's the background, like they're
Yeah.
like
The background's in the
photoshopped into
office.
like an office, and
Yes.
it's like me at the end of my workday, and it's
I
just
do
like
those. I do those memes. They're like remixes. You see the memes and you take them and you press remix and you add your own thing on top of it. I do that all the time. Those do very well. Like I have one of this deflated balloon
it's
that's like,
everyone can relate.
yeah, this deflated balloon that's like rolling down the stairs, and I wrote something like me on my way to manage up to my manager who makes 4 times what I make. And that's one of my top that's one of my top posts. Very silly.
I think, but I don't think there's anybody out there that does not relate to those at some to some extent. Like I will send them to my old coworkers that I used to work with few years ago. We're still very close, and we'll still send each other stuff, and I'll be like,
Yeah,
we're just
those
like, yep,
get sent around. Yeah, those
yeah,
get shared.
oh
When
yeah.
when I talk about how to be a great leader, those don't get shared as much. But the balloon and the managing up, yes.
Oh, I'll share about the great leaders. I'm a firm believer because I think that that's something that people, especially, no offense to management, I think management needs because the thing is that a lot of managers are taught by other managers who are taught
Or
by
they're
other
not taught at
managers,
all.
or they're not taught at all. So the only thing they know is to implement
Yeah,
fear and have that control, and they
that's
think that
right.
that's the way to do it, and
Yeah,
it's
why would
like
they know otherwise?
and it's just like, but that's not. And that's where I bite my tongue a
Yeah,
lot in a lot of instances because I don't want to, ruffle feathers, but you don't want your team to want to leave you. You want your team to be able to grow with you. And,
right.
when you create that space of fear, or even like, or the feeling of control, just
It
it
backfires.
backfires. And,
It abs
I've seen some really good people with a lot of potential to be extraordinary managers, you know, lose sight of the real purpose. And, it's not, it's unfortunate. It's
yeah,
unfortunate because
it
they
is,
don't
and
know leadership.
it's avoidable.
There's a big difference.
It's completely avoidable. There's
Yeah.
so many books and trainings out there. It just isn't valued, unfortunately.
Right.
So that's the conversation I'm trying to force us to have.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I want to get my hands on your book just because I'm really fascinated by everything we talked about. We'll definitely be, listening in on your podcast. I'm going to also be making sure I have all your links to put in the description of this
Okay,
podcast
cool.
episode so people
Yeah.
can find you. And I will also be including my own personal links in case I can be of service to anybody in their journeys. But we are out of time, unfortunately. And I'm so glad that you came on and, shared about your
Oh,
expertise and your knowledge because I've been inspired by it for
oh,
sure.
thank you for saying that. Because seriously, sometimes I wonder, like, did I make a big mistake trying to have this massive conversation with corporate America? So I appreciate you saying that. Thank
The
you.
fact that you heard your call, you heard a calling and you're following that calling and you take the steps to do it, there is no way that you will fail because you are doing all the right things.
Okay,
You
thanks.
did not make a mistake.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. But it had to be done either way, right?
Yes,
It had to be done.
absolutely.
Had to be said. So
Absolutely.
thank you
And
for
we
letting
are
me
so grateful
do
for the
that.
bravery to do so.
I appreciate it. Thank
Oh,
you.
you're welcome.
Nice to talk to you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And like I said, you can contact all the contact information will be in the description of this podcast, as well as the links to be able to get your hands on Tosca's book. I think it'll be game changing for a lot of people. So I'm excited for you. I
Thank
am. So,
you.
and until next time, everybody, please let go of fear and let your spirit shine.